Aloha. So I'm inspired to share a story about something that happened around 2012, and you could say maybe a spiritual awakening of sorts. And when I say spiritual awakening, I don't mean like, bam, I'm enlightened. I think it's something that happens more incrementally, and we go through many of them. I think it's something like a flower blooming, or even growing. It starts out as a seed and then blossoms. Um, and this is something that's a process. It takes time. And uh, during one of these moments where I was opening up a little bit more to perceiving things and stuff, I was having some difficulty with it. I was dealing with really horrible nightmares, and I was having like really odd sensations when I would try to sleep. Like my skin would crawl and stuff, and I couldn't explain what was happening. I couldn't, I couldn't figure it out, and it was like really wearing on me. And then I was having a lot more perceptions, like of a psychic nature between myself and others, and it was getting kind of difficult to deal with. I was like kind of beside myself at points, and there was one day I went online to try to see if I could find answers or some kind of like relief from it, something I could do, and I ended up stumbling across this lady on YouTube who goes by Psychic Medium Sunshine Rose, and I should check out her channel and see if she's still on there, because this was like years ago at this point. But she was talking about psychic attack and even just like, I guess you could say, maybe even spiritual hygiene in a sense, because I don't think it's always necessarily someone attacking you when you're experiencing stuff like this. Sometimes I think it's just being open to the energies of other people, and sometimes that jives and sometimes it doesn't. I don't think it's always necessarily like a malicious attack, right? I think it's just, us learning how to use the spiritual navigation systems that we've been given. Um, and so I was still working through that and trying to figure it out, as I still am today, because it's an incremental process, much like the frog in the water analogy. And it does feel like that sometimes, because it can be an intense, where you feel like once you get to that boiling point, it can be like, ah. And that's why it's bit by bit, because if you were to take a person and open them up spiritually immediately, like, it wouldn't work. The frog would jump out of the water. But if you start warming that water bit by bit, then, and there's a bit of a kind of a gruesome idea of the frog in the water, but in a sense, there's some truth in that, I guess, because, as we go through this change, these spiritual changes, we do go through something like a death of sorts. We lose the parts of ourselves that are bullshit, I guess you could say. And so, like, we're left with, the real substance. And it can be a really challenging, scary thing sometimes as we go through this process. And so, I was going through this around 2012. I was having one of these, and I think they happen in phases where we have points in our life where it's turned up quite a bit more than it was. So I was going through this in 2012, and as I'm having nightmares, I would go to bed at night and I could feel my skin crawling. I couldn't figure out what it was, and I was having these experiences with other people that I couldn't explain in a way that made me feel good about it, and I was like also getting worried because it was starting to feel like an attack. I was starting to freak out a little bit, and so I found this lady's channel, and she said you can ask for help from I don't like saying higher beings. Let's just say like older beings, like that have more experience, and because I think in an infinite perspective, with everything being one, it's really just perspective at the end of the day, Uh, and there's always something bigger and there's always something smaller. So it's really more important to just tune into your own center within that. Um, but one thing she mentioned is if you're going through it and you're having a hard time, you can ask for help from beings that have more perspective than you. And the reason why you want to ask for help is because they're going to respect your free will. They're not going to intervene unless you ask them to, because there could be lessons, there could be things, maybe even subconsciously, that require more work, maybe. But if you ask, that kind of gives them the ability to step in without interfering with your growth and free will. You're kind of like, okay, I'm ready for this, right? If they're good beings, that is, like, I think that's the difference when we talk about like angelic entities and demonic entities and stuff like that. They're gonna respect you, basically. And it's the same thing with people. Like, let's just simplify it and look at it. It's all people. People act in all kinds of different ways, so there's some discernment. So what was interesting is she's talking about this, and she's like, they'll communicate with you. There's different things they can do to kind of get your attention sometimes. And so, like, some of the ways she mentioned would be like maybe finding coins, feathers, or seeing repeating strings of numbers. It could be really personal to each individual, and it is something you could even program. You could put the intention of like, okay, if I'm communicating with my guides and these beings, I want to manifest, I don't know, dimes or feathers or like a number pattern. In her case, she talked about the number pattern 999, and when she would see the number pattern 999, to her that meant her guides were trying to get her attention, that there was something important to be, mindful of, be on the lookout for. And so she was at the time working at her parents' clothing store, and she had just finished up for the night. She batched out the register, and then when she did that, the register ran this long string of nines, which is really, really rare, to have that happen. So that was on her mind on her drive home. And on her drive home in LA in 8 lanes of traffic, suddenly she sees this car pass her, and the car's license plate has 999 in it. And she heard a voice in her head telepathically tell her to get over into the other lane, like with a sense of urgency. And she did without hesitation. And the minute she got into the other lane, this car came up out of nowhere, and had she not moved, she would have been in a pile up in 8 lanes of traffic in LA, and it would have been a really bad day. So she shared that story to kind of illustrate, like how this can play out. And that story in and of itself is interesting to me, but my own experience with that blew my mind. Because I watched this video, and the next day, I'm still going through this stuff to the point where, like, I'm driving to go pick up my now ex-husband from work, and I'm having one of these kind of episodes, and I'm like, having a panic attack, basically. I can't breathe, I'm crying, and I'm driving. It's not a good combination, and suddenly this car passes me, and the license plate has 999 on it, and I'm like, whoa. And then another car passes me, and the license plate says relax on it. And I'm like, whoa. And then on the way home, after I picked up my ex-husband, this car came up, and the license plate said Uriel on it. And I wasn't super versed in biblical stuff, but I knew that name looked biblical. It sounded familiar to me, so I looked it up when I got home. And it's an archangel, or it was, they do stuff. But Uriel was considered an archangel, and his name means, I think they transcend gender to some extent, but his name means light of God, and his symbol is like a hand with a flame in it. And so what was interesting too is so my ex was in the car with me, and the car that passed us that said Uriel on it was this super fancy looking silver sports car. I'm not even sure what kind it would be. It was eye catching, and I could see the person's face in the rear view mirror, and what was strange is we're both looking at this person, and I'm seeing a face that looks masculine. I thought and the eyes were super intense. And he's seeing a face that looks feminine. So we're both we're kind of having an argument about it. Not quite an argument, we're bickering a little bit, and but I saw that, and I got home, and I was like, oh, that's an archangel. And the whole thing shifted my opinions on a lot of stuff. and it gave me a sense of comfort in a time where I was feeling really, really fucked up, you know. And so I just wanted to share that story, because synchronous, bizarre stuff can happen. But the thing is, when that happened, I was driving my car and I was beside myself, and I remembered that video the night before, and I asked for help. I'm like, help me, I don't know what to do, please help me. And then suddenly, this car passes me, 999, another car passes me, relax, which is exactly what I needed to do. Probably the best advice I could have been given at that time, because you really can't do anything until you can kind of go within and calm yourself down. It's acting versus reacting, you know. It's taking that energy and taking control of it and balancing it and then moving forward. So the angelic life advice I got was relax. And so I just think that's one of those words I see now, and it always reminds me of that. Same thing with like seeing the string of 999, and I still see that quite a bit. And I think you can kind of program like how you want to communicate with these beings. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but I think on some level they transcend our labels and religions and stuff like that. It's just, you know, the way we are able to make sense of it based on our programming and upbringing. And so my upbringing, my parents were Lutheran. They weren't really practicing or anything like that. And then I had family members who were pagan, and had a lot of family members who kind of were pretty open-minded. So my upbringing has been pretty open-minded, and because of that, I tend to view all of these things as the same energy on a different level, and then we just kind of compartmentalize it in a sense. So I just want to share that, and with the hopes that, you know, it might help somebody relax, or, you know, if you start seeing little synchronous things, it might mean something. You start seeing feathers all over the place, or different coins, or number patterns, or maybe something more unique and personal to you. Pay attention to that, and then don't forget to ask for help if you need it, because the idea is they're not really going to intervene if they're good beings, because they want to honor your free will and respect your will as an individual person. So, you know, you gotta ask for help. And that was an experience I had that I'll always remember. It's always gonna stick with me. And you know, as I think about it, I feel like this energy has been in my life for a long time. I remember around high school, I had done this picture of like a hand, and I took my hand and photoshopped it, and I put a flame in it, and the symbol for Uriel is light of God. So I think on someone kind of influenced that. And then there was another thing too, like, just kind of, it's kind of funny and weird. I'll share it anyway. But I remember way back in the day, back in high school at this point, you know, I had this friend group, and we were all really interested in psychic stuff and things like that, and we were kind of the nerdy ones, but we actually made it a point to practice this stuff, and we were, you know, like, into it. It was our thing. And I remember one of my friends telling me one way to open yourself up to doing all this stuff is knowing what your soul's name is. And he said you can meditate on it and it'll come to you. And so I was doing that, and I had a few things pop into my head, and I didn't really take it seriously at the time. I don't even know what that means, whatever. But one of the things was Red Wing, and I remember that popping in my head. And at the time, you know, I'm in high school, I didn't really think much of it. I was like, Red Wing, whatever. I don't know what that means. Okay. But then, fast forward, I'm researching the Archangel Uriel, and the Red Wing thing, they say he dipped his wing in the blood of Christ, and he's often depicted with red wings, so who knows. But I think in terms of consciousness, like, I kind of think Uriel might also be akin to like Thoth and other, like Ganesha, the energies that are, you know, creatives, like art, writing, the arts and stuff. Uriel's known as a patron of the arts, so like Ganesha and a number of others. Thoth, Hermes, Mercury. I personally think they're all kind of the same thing, and I think they might be something like, you know, our higher selves. I'm an artist, so that higher part of me might be connected to that. You know, I'm not saying that I'm that guy. I don't think it works like that, but I think that it might help us toward understanding, you know, our own souls a little better, and because I think it does speak to archetypes and stuff like that. Like, so like, you know, my idea of consciousness, what makes the most sense to me is that it's a lot like, you know, Russian nesting dolls, where there is things that are infinitely bigger and things that are infinitely smaller, and it's all a matter of perspective. But we're inside of other consciousnesses, so like, if you're so like a collective, if you will, right? And maybe these like higher beings that we think of are kind of like the combined collective energy of all the people who resonate that way, you know. And so like you can tune into a higher part of yourself, so like everybody, you know, like, so like it might go like, so this person, and then like say like 12 archetypes, right? And then like however we want to describe that, and then and so on and so on, you know. And I think it's all a matter of perspective, but it's like understanding that. And I think, you know, now that I look back on that time in high school when he's like, you know, you have to find out your name, I don't think that means so much a name as in a label, as so much as a name and who you are and what you give a shit about. What do you care about? What's important to you? What makes you fucking, what makes your soul sing? What gives you joy? You know, like what's your vibe? You know, and a name doesn't always necessarily have to be like what we would consider a name. Maybe that it means more like, you know, like back in the day, names would describe somebody, right? And so maybe it's more like, what's your energy signature versus what's your name? And if you can tune into that, then you can tune into that spiritual power that gives you the ability to kind of work with the waves. That's my opinion. It's what makes the most sense to me at this point, because I feel like it has this way of sort of reconciling the big and the small and how it all works and connects together. And while you're part of everything anyway, you might resonate better with certain things, you know. Like an artist is probably going to be having a connection to artistic beings. Like a person who's like into sports might have a bit of a connection, and there may be definitely some intersections there, like a massive infinite Venn diagram. But anyway, the advice that I got, the best advice I ever got, the most blatant spiritual, I shouldn't say the most, I've had a lot of, but one of the most blatant spiritual kind of experiences I've had, and it all came down to relax. So I just want to share that. Relax, have a great day, okay, bye.